I'm just kind of excited to share the process of this state of intimate partner violence that was just published. So just like Lottie has initially shared, I am Jenny and I'm based in Nigeria, currently supporting COFIM as the West African Regional Liaison. And so for our region, we do have a monthly regional engagement. And one of the things that surfaced during more like monthly regional engagement was intimate partner violence. You know, members from Ghana echoed it, members from Nigeria echoed it, members from Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, like it became an issue, and we were like, okay, fine, let's see what we can find. Let's see if what we've heard so far from the media, what we know from our practice is the same, more like based on evidence. So we decided to take it as a task to co-author a blog. Initially, it was a blog we wanted to do, but the idea was to, highlight issues of intimate partner violence, the way it is in real life across the region. And we decided to use country evidence, more like this is country data from National Demographic Health Survey. So this is actually coming from the country. And we reviewed this data and we found, more like terrifying numbers of intimate partner violence. It was so terrifying that in Nigeria, with the current demographic health survey, the country accounted for about 31% of women of reproductive age. This means women who are between the ages of 15 to 49 years who have, in their course of life, have experienced intimate partner violence. And that was not just enough. The, the data also recorded that about 36% of these women, you know, who have ever been married in their lifetime have also witnessed intimate partner violence. But the beautiful thing is about this is that we leverage the abundance, should I say, knowledge of our members across this region. So it was more like our members across the country within the West Africa became more like researchers contributing to this piece. So that way, it kind of brought, nuance. It's nuanced more like our findings, the evidence we brought forward. So besides that, even in Ghana, we also found that about 28% based on country data. And this has to do with like more like women who have ever been married before. And for Ghana, other evidence, more like, okay, this is away from the Ghana Demographic Health Survey. The surface is to be about 39% of intimate partner violence. And so it was really beginning to be very interesting for us. And again, we looked at Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone was positioning at 43% of intimate partner violence. This is just not numbers. These are experiences of women and girls who have been violated over time. Liberia was sitting at 55% of women who have been in a kind of a long-term relationship. And Cameroon was at 40%. And a particular part of Cameroon called the Central Region was accounting up to 51%. This is really madness. So beside these statistics, we went further to see how we can nuance this evidence with they're all real life scenarios, but more like okay, we need to understand what is the story behind a face or one of the faces of this data. And we went to Nigeria and we had a terrifying experience of one of the survivors of intimate partner violence. And the thing is, I am actually that individual. That story was me with the person I actually dated. So that was me, God sparing my life that I didn't pass, through that situation. And because it was really very difficult for me to surface that story in this research because it's more like so the more I kind of see this data, like the more terrifying they are to me. And I'm like, okay, I just need to kind of surface the story. This is what happened to me. And because at the time it happened to me, I was seeing it, I wasn't actually seeing it as intimate partner violence. I was seeing it as more like, okay, he loved me, so he needed, to control me. But the control was really beyond. It was life threatening because one, I passed out. I temporarily passed out. And it wasn't just about physical violence, it was sexual violence. And for him, having sex with me at that moment was more like to re-echo ownership, being whom he hadn't even married. So just imagine, maybe that could, get you to imagine the experiences of those who are in an intimate relationship whose bride price has been paid. Just imagine should I say, the audacity of, should I say, the audacity and the reason why for the intimate partner violence could, continue to go on. So for us as a region, we are so excited to have this published, and the idea, or should I say, the core objective of us, coming up with this statement was really to push, to push a regional advocacy, across this country to see how or what can be done. Because looking at the demographic health surveys, it was written there that intimate partner violence is a known thing, like it's on the public domain. We know that, we see it. But what has been done? To even talk about that, in Nigeria, there is a law called the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. What has this law done so far to addressing issues of intimate partner violence? Not just addressing it in the way that it brings justice and it brings kind of recourse to survivors of intimate partner violence. The same thing also in Sierra Leone, there is Domestic Violence Act 2012. What has this actually done to, curb the incident or the prevalence of intimate partner violence? So for me, I think maybe there is so much of tokenistic or tokenism around issues of intimate partner violence. But I think for us as a region, this is something we need to do. This is because even beyond this, now this is published, we are seeing trending issues of sexual violence for minors, for girls. And I think this is really something that we are hoping that as a region we can contribute significantly to, pushing for intervention direction that will, should I say, address or eliminate issues of intimate partner violence. So I will just leave it here and move the mic over to Lucky, and I'll be standing by for more interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us and most stories of women from West Africa. It's also very interesting to see the role of social media and how it has, it's double-sided, right? It has kind of brought out, I know that, for example, in the past years, the issues of intimate partner violence in West Africa have been trending on West Africa social media, but also the normalization of some of the very, very harmful, societal norms is kind of very, very vivid on social media, which kind of brings me to the marches we have seen in Kenya against femicide recently. I think earlier on in the year, all over Kenya, there were feminists, activists, allies marching on the streets everywhere in Kenya, not just Nairobi, against the rising cases of femicide. And it kind of, that's also a type of violence against women. And I know Simone is now with us, the regional liaison of East and Southern Africa, and maybe you have more knowledge or nuance about this, and you could share a bigger picture on what femicide has looked like in Kenya this past few years, but also what feminists, what activists in the region are doing.
Yes, absolutely. I'd be so happy to discuss it. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, no, I really like that you have contextualize it within kind of social media, because in conversation with a lot of the feminists on the ground who are doing this type of work, it has really come to light that social media, like you're saying, is a double-edged sword, in that obviously we've seen all of the wonderful work that they've been doing and the mobilizing as a result of social media. But in many ways, the reason why they felt, okay, it is time for us to say something, was just the manner in which femicide and violence against women and girls was being discussed on social media. So we have kind of this norm on social media where it's just like you can talk about anything, everyone is protected by their phone screen or their computer, and people can really mouth off. And what was happening with a lot of the femicides that were going on in the context of Kenya was parents, family members were finding out about these deaths through social media, but also the rhetoric that was being put out there about the people who had died or who had experienced, these instances of violence were very harmful, very degrading, and again, just kind of that lack of kind of rules around how we conduct ourselves on social media became an ever-pressing issue. And I think something that also pushed these feminists on the ground to say something about what is going on. And I think to speak to kind of the rhetoric and the way in which things are being handled, I think that's something that the feminists in Kenya are really trying to call attention to, is that this is not just a matter of individualized instances of violence, but rather just the manner in which women and the body of women and gendered minorities are being perceived, and the stratification and the value that's being placed on people's lives. Because really that's what ends up resulting in femicide occurring, in different instances of violence occurring. And obviously we do know within this global world order, within the hierarchy of, human life, women, girls, gender minorities tend to fall at the bottom. And as a result of that, they're the ones who are experiencing a lot of the violence. So I think that's something that they definitely wanted to bring forward when they were conducting these protests. But I think they also wanted to just highlight the fact that this is not the first time that they have demanded that change be enacted by those in power, by legislators, by the people who are supposed to hold accountable. So in 2019, a protest similar to this actually did happen. I don't think it was as large, and I think obviously social media has progressed over time, but they were demands that were made, and the government promised a lot of things, but they have not done anything to shift the way in which we discuss some of these issues. Femicide in and of itself is not even constitutionally recognized within the context of Kenya. So these feminists also just really wanted to call into attention the work that was done by feminists in the past that they're still doing today, to call into attention the fact that violence against women and girls is rampant, and a lot of it has to do with the way in which people perceive the value of life when it comes to women, girls, and gender minorities. So I think some things that, for me personally, I was, very impressed by was the fact that within the context of these protests, they were able to really bring different stakeholders together. And I think when we're speaking about how we can, first of all, take care of ourselves as feminists who are doing this type of work, but also be able to really enact systematic change in a way that really speaks to the norms and the ideologies that people hold, it's really important that we have multiple stakeholders coming to the forefront. And they were able to successfully do that. And I think all of that just was blanketed under the mandate that enough is enough, and we cannot keep having the rate of deaths that we are experiencing right now when it comes to women, girls, and gender minorities. So that's something that I felt was worth mentioning and worth bringing to the forefront, because that's something that's not easy to do, especially when you have, for example, religious leaders versus sex workers coming together to advocate for the same thing. It's not an easy task to put forward, but I think it is something that should be recognized as a beacon of hope, potentially, especially in the context of the world that we're living in today. But I think I might pause there and maybe leave space for any questions or follow-ups, because I do think this is a conversation. But really, yeah, those are some of the things I wanted to highlight, the nuances I wanted to bring forward about the violence that's occurring within Kenya, but I want to say more generally within the regions that I actually do oversee, which is East and Southern Africa. I think there's these instances are happening across the board, and really shout out to the Kenyan feminists for actually bringing this forward and finally bringing attention to the fact that femicide is happening and the lives of women, girls, and gender minorities are consistently under threat.
Thank you so much, Simone. Also, I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. So I have one quick question to ask you before I go to Yasmina. And this draws from what you mentioned about how we view value of lives and kind of also merging it with the role of social media. I know recently we have been seeing a lot of what is happening in DRC. And so I would like you to speak to that, but also briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, I guess I'll start with the second part of your question. I'm Marie-Simone, but you can call me Simone, and I am the regional liaison for East and Southern Africa. The way in which I describe myself is an advocate who wears numerous hats. So I think I'm just really passionate about creating a world that's much better for myself and people who occupy bodies similar to myself, and who have similar experiences to mine. The manner in which I do that is really through my communications channels, as well as strategic advocacy. And my domains of expertise, I would say, range between violence against women and girls, sexual reproductive health, as well as women and girls empowerment. Really, in a nutshell, I'm a girl. I'm just a girl who wants better for the girls. So now to kind of speak to what's going on in DRC, I really think, thank you for kind of highlighting, the fact that the stratification of life is really what is the bane of our existence right now, because all of these issues are very much connected, not only because on a regional level, these are obviously within the same regions, but also just the mere fact that at the end of the day, the reason why women, girls, gender minorities experience violence is because we do live in this world where production is the most important thing. And that is what is utilized to decide who has access to certain resources, who has access to power, and who has autonomy over their livelihoods. So what we're seeing right now within the context of the DRC is clearly this need for producing, for hitting the bottom line, for feeding the pockets of those who already have so many resources, so much power, at the cost of the basic livelihoods of people on the ground. And so what we're then seeing is, or what's being evidenced in all of the reports and, the advocacy that's being done by people who are connected to what's going on in DRC, is the fact that individual lives are being systemically erased. And the people who are from the DRC are in many ways just being wiped off of the face of this planet, all just to feed a specific profit baseline to be able to get a certain amount of income. And their lives have been put into this place where they're simply here to produce. And then once you're no longer producing for us, whether that's, at whatever age you are at, then you no longer become relevant. And then that's more generally, but then can we even go into kind of the more nuanced perspective, or rather the intersectionality that then comes into play, where women and girls are also suffering much more. So obviously within the DRC, there's been a lot of internal displacement, as well as just precarious ways of living. And because of that, we see that the levels of violence tend to start increasing a lot more when it comes to women and girls. So within the kind of tools of war, you find that a lot of women and girls are subjected to rape. They are subjected to consistent pregnancies that they have to carry to term. They don't have access to healthcare. They don't have access to those resources. They don't have access to education. And all of those, in my books, and I think in many people's eyes, is actually violence being exerted. So violence is not just simply, the physical that we see, but also inhibiting people's ability to reach their full potential and live a full life, just because we've decided that actually their life is secondary or tertiary to the person at the top whose bottom line we have to reach. So this has been going on for a very long time, and there's a lot of countries who have a vested interest in the resources that are found within the DRC, but it's really come at the cost of people's livelihoods. And I think it's about time that we start calling into accountability decision makers, people who have power, to be able to stop what is going on in the DRC, And I think a lot of that inadvertently is going to mean that we have to shift the way in which our markets are functioning, the way in which we see life, and the way in which we prioritize certain lives, because we've gotten away for a very long time at the cost of women and girls with kind of just saying, okay, the top people, the top dogs, in many ways, is the man, this heterosexual man who gets to hold power, is okay. And then everyone else below that is suffering, and they are experiencing violence in so many different ways. And so now more than ever, I think the fact that we have this opportune moment where we're seeing those connections a bit more clearly, we really need to be calling for something to change, not only just kind of in a quick fix solution of like, okay, let's get people out of these violent situations. Because again, this is a matter of ideology. It's not just a matter of circumstance or the way in which things are manifesting right now on the ground. We really need to create systemic, long-term, sustainable change. And now, and even before now was the time to make that change.
Thank you so much for that, Simone. And yeah, I know yesterday was the time to make that change. As I go to Yasmin, I'm going to request you to look at the chat. There is a question there for you. But moving on to Yasmina, as Simone was talking about, especially the human rights violations that are happening in DRC, and you know, the power weighing scale of deciding who lives and who stays in which lands and who has a right to enjoy, you know, their full autonomy. It brings me to the situation in Palestine. And so, Yasmina, I would like you to introduce yourself a bit and talk to us a bit about the situation in Palestine, but also if you could talk about the brief that we worked on that highlighted the 16 stories of women in the SWANA region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucky, and very grateful to be in this space. My name is Yasmina. I'm from Morocco, and I'm a feminist activist and the founder of Politics for Her, which is an organization that advocates for the inclusive and meaningful participation of young women and girls in politics, decision-making, leadership, focusing on global majority countries with the intersectional, decolonial approach. And I'm also the regional liaison for the SWANA region. And before, it's known as the MENA region, but when I joined, I asked if we could change it to SWANA because this is the colonial term. MENA stands for Middle East and North Africa. Middle East is a very Western-centric, European-centric term. Middle of what? Exactly, you know? So SWANA, Southwest Asia and North Africa, is more inclusive, decolonial, and represents us more and better. And talking about the situation in Palestine and specifically the ongoing genocide in Gaza that has been going on for 6 months now. A lot of people were not aware that this oppression is nothing new. This has been going on for 75 years with the first Nakba, when 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their own land. And if we think about it, this ties down to systems of oppression, colonialism, capitalism, and also a sense of dehumanization of brown people, of Black people, of people of color, like it was mentioned by Simone, who's worthy. Because even when we think about the refugee convention and the refugee system back in 1945, when it was launched in 1951, it was very Western and European centric for Europeans that were either leaving communism or Nazis and so forth. So it's still not adapted to our time, and it's still very redundant. And we've seen those double standards with the invasion and war of Ukraine and how these refugees were so welcomed, that there's been temporary protection, that they've been granted job, that we've also seen the blatant racism on media outlets, where they would say, those are not refugees from Syria, from Palestine, or from Afghanistan. Those are like us, they're white with blue eyes, similar to us. So this is exactly the kind of white supremacy that we're saying with the illegal apartheid state of Israel as well. Because Israel is a colonial project, one that has been supported by Western powers, especially by the United States of America, which is known for its beautiful track of invasion and of destabilization of many countries within the SWANA region. And if you start connecting the dots, you see that these systems of oppression, ideologies like Zionism, are attributed and connected to many issues worldwide, not just in Palestine, that there's also presence in Haiti with what's going on right now, that there's also that they've been backing up coups in countries in Central America. And anyway, I always think that it all ties down to patriarchy, colonialism, and systems of oppression where Black and brown people have been completely dehumanized. If we think about particularly women and girls, Palestinian women and girls, they've been going through oppression, through rape, through assault, and through abuse for 75 years. And this was very well and is very well documented. And there are horrifying reports that are coming out right now as we speak within those past days from Israeli occupation forces that have been abusing Palestinian women and girls, boys and men as well, in their prison, or even when they took over the Shifa hospital last week. So this is not something new, but this is not making the headlines the same way as rape was weaponized during October 7th, because those investigation of so-called rape, and we always want to stand with survivors. We always want to, there's no justification, and women are used as weapons of war in every conflict going on. But when a propaganda state is using and weaponizing women's rights to feed their propaganda, this is where it starts becoming very problematic. The investigation was proven to be completely misleading, and that there's absolutely no proof for that. But all of the Western media took it by storm. It made all of the headlines along the 40 beheaded babies. And this is again where we see this double standards, because Palestinian women and girls have been not only living under occupation, apartheid, but they have also been abused repeatedly, daily, in prisons. They're talking about 100 hostages. There are thousands of hostages in Israeli prisons, including kids, because Palestinians do not face the same judicial system. They go through a criminal court. Anyway, now it was mentioned and it was approved over and over, especially with South Africa taking the ICJ, that this is very plausible that it is indeed a genocide. All of the UN special rapporteurs have also testified confirming that. But what do we have? We have a neo-colonial system with 5 countries that hold veto power within the UN. And this is also a realization that we need to change and to shift this system. And there are conversations that are coming up, and it's beautiful to see that there's a lot of solidarity between nations from global majority countries. And this proves that we do not need saving from the West. That, again, the West has shown its true face, its blatant double standards, because they're also profiting from this war. And talking about the SWANA region overall, we did a brief in collaboration between Politics for Her and COFEM, and violence against women is considered as being a silent cancer. It's extremely widespread. It's attached to social, cultural, political norms and beliefs, a misinterpretation of religion, and many other things. You can find 16 case studies where we have highlighted 16 different countries of and examples of violence against women and girls within the region through to humanize, to have faces but also names on these stories, because we get so desensitized. Again, it becomes numbers. Oh, there's been X amount of femicides. There's 1 in 3 women that faces violence in her lifetime. But we really wanted to show that women are more than numbers, and that there are no borders when it comes to violence against women, but specifically within our region, that there's a big lack of investment towards prevention. And this is where we need to advocate for. We need to not only think about eradicating or facing violence, but we need to think about how can we prevent it so it doesn't happen in the first place, because violence costs trillions of dollars a year to the global economy. And I'll stop
Thank you so much for that, Yasmina, and also for mentioning desensitization. I know that one of the issues that was raised in the statement that we shared against militarism and settler colonialism, which was put together by Simone, I've also shared it on the chat, is how even the language about the real life issues that affect us as people is taken away, and it becomes, like multiple crises, or like, things get reduced to numbers and other, like there's a lot of othering that so we become very desensitized from people's actual lived experiences. But drawing from that as well, and maybe two of you could speak to this. I'll give you a chance to whoever will be able to respond. Before we speak to what solidarity can look like right now, do we see any kind of interconnectedness in all these issues, even if they're happening across different regions? So for example, do we think there is a bit of structural interconnectedness between intimate partner violence in West Africa and, the femicide that's happening in Kenya, or the human rights violations that are happening in the DRC, and the genocide that's happening in Darfur and Palestinian? Do we think that there's some underlying basic interconnecting issues? Feel free to unmute.
I can chime in. Yeah, no, so I think for me, the thread that I see across the board is really the manner in which capitalism and patriarchy have defined masculinities and what it means to embody masculinity and the value that's being placed on embodying said masculinity. So I think if we look back at, the construction of the current global world order, a lot of it was enacted through violence and through the deprecation of communities and the stripping of the entire identities and ideologies. And in place of that were these Western-centric notions of what it is to, be the head of a household, what it means to be a man who brings value. And by extension of that, then, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a woman who is supposed to be with a man who's supposed to be a specific way, so on and so forth. And I think what ends up happening is that people uphold a lot of these ideologies because those ideologies are very much tied to their access to resources, their access to, power in many ways. And I think as human beings, naturally, we want to protect ourselves, but also our communities. And when it's being made to seem that the only way in which we can do that is by upholding certain ideologies and certain versions of ourselves, people are more likely to do that. So I think as someone who comes from both Southern Africa and West Africa, and being able to connect kind of what is the common thread that I've seen in each of these contexts, there are men in many situations who are trying to uphold specific versions of masculinity because those masculinities mean, do they have a job? Are they respected in their communities? So on and so forth. And then by virtue of that, obviously, because everything is dialectical, everything is relational, the experiences of women are then negatively impacted by that. And I think in this context also, it's important to understand that, the word man and woman is really just serving as a proxy of, that person who's supposed to have power and that person who's supposed to be subservient. So I think until we can reconstruct the manner in which we value certain identities or certain mannerisms, we're going to consistently run into this problem. Because right now, it is valuable for you to be misogynistic in many ways. It does bring certain levels of rewards if you are, someone who subjugates other people, who can show that they can exert power over other people. They are real, tangible, life-saving values that are being ascribed to doing some of these things. And as a result of that, the people who have had to have this power exerted over them, predominantly being women and girls, end up experiencing a lot of violence and end up, not being able to really find themselves out of that situation. So for me, to put it in a nutshell, I think we have to restructure what we value as society, especially when it comes to what makes us a human being. And I think right now what we prioritize is very wrong. And that's why we find a lot of people are upholding amongst themselves these very negative ideologies that then result in violence.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Simone. Jenny, had you unmuted yourself?
Okay, yes. Okay,
Please
so
go ahead.
it's just to add to what Simeon just shared, and so I think everyone knows the central thing is patriarchy. But again, in restructuring, shifting our system, I think we need to start thinking about norm creation. We need to more like norm recreation because it's been created, and it's seen like a normal thing, the way of life, the way it should be, the way men and boys see women's body, and the way control is so normalized within the fabric of the society. Meaning, if you are not able to control your wife, your girlfriend, your partner, you're seen as less of a man, as a weakling, and all of these is embedded in attitude, in behavior, in the way women continue to suffer, suffer for issues of violence, and it continues to go more like from generation to generation. And somehow I wonder if this is ever going to stop. But again, this is where solidarity comes because if we know this is happening, this is the reality we are all facing. Because to be honest, none of us is free. In one way or the other, we are dealing with this issue. And even if we don't deal with this issue directly, the person next to us, our best friend, our sister is dealing with this issue. And we cannot hold our hands while everyone suffers. Because if everyone is suffering, you are also suffering. Because if you don't suffer at this moment, they will come for you. And when they come for you, it's going to be so pathetic. So I think this is where solidarity comes. And we need to more like work together, unify our efforts to see how we can, match against this evil of violence. Because I also see, even in the conflict situation, in humanitarian setting, just like what Yasmina just shared, it still revolve around patriarchy. Because if it is really very out of patriarchal codes, there would have been a way of solving it, but it's not. It's not. So I don't think this is the way we can continue. But I think this is an amazing step further to solidifying our efforts, to actually conceptualize it more like, the solidarity we hold together to make sure that, yes, if we are stopping it, from the East and South Africa, we are stopping it from the West Africa, we're stopping from the SWANA region, we are stopping it from everywhere. Somehow, change takes time. But with all of these pieces of effort coming together, somehow there will be some level of solidification. Yeah, we can look back and smile, even with all our scars and our bruises. I think this is what I have to share.
Thank you so much for that, Jenny. I agree with you. We are not free until everyone is free, absolutely. Even if the shackles look a little different. Sometimes the shackles look like they have a ribbon on them, but they're still shackles. And we are not free until everyone is free. And moving on, so like you mentioned, Jenny, when you were finishing your conversation, your chat, you mentioned about working together and solidarity and knowing that we are working under the same, isms, colonialism, misogyny, like all these things that are racism, that are all interconnected, and these that also show up in our different contexts in different ways. What does feminist solidarity actually mean right now? And I know that's a bit complicated, but are there any tangible things or theories that you think about that you'll say, okay, this is what we can do right now as a collective, as feminists, as individuals? Maybe Yasmina, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that
Yeah.
there's been amazing collaboration and solidarity transnational, global, between different, because realizing that we all share similar struggles, even though the battles are different. But for example, I live in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is under US neocolonial rule, and it's still not free. And if you walk in the streets of Puerto Rico, you're going to see Free Palestine everywhere. And that's the work of feminist grassroots organizations and movement, because they're reflecting and realizing that there's a lot of interconnectedness between different struggles. And there's a huge also community of Palestinians here, thousands of them in Puerto Rico that came after the first Nakba. So I love to see so much solidarity between people of color. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about solidarity without pointing out the cancer that and the plague that is white feminism that we've been seeing spreading like a disease, and a lot of very highly influential people that always name themselves as feminists or as, you know, boss babes or boss leaders or boss girls or whatever. They've always used that to look good, right? But then when it comes to real feminism and when it comes to defending women in Gaza who are undergoing C-section without anesthesia, who lose their kids, or so many orphan kids, or that we see that kids are getting limbs removed without anesthesia, or that we get seeing girls getting raped. This complete deafening silence. So I think that's also our responsibility, as much as we have to celebrate the solidarity, and it's beautiful to focus on the positive aspect, we also have to call out, because there's no more space for white feminism in true intersectional feminism. There's no room for that, and it needs to get dismantled. There's a lot of unlearning to do, and that's also, I saw comments about education, and I love that, because, you know, even when it comes to within our region where there's a very strong dominance of Islam, there's a lot of amazing feminist figures, Islamic feminist figures, that wrote about how Islam has been used, misinterpreted, to serve the male elite. Throughout history, there are countless women leaders in Islam. There are countless feminist figures. There were countless matriarchal societies, but they've been erased from the history books because, as we know, it's been written by the victors. So even history has silenced us. So we have a lot of unlearning to do, and then learn again and dismantle of those systems of oppression, whether it is capitalism, the patriarchy, or colonialism, which are all interlinked and which are all affecting us somehow at a level. I feel that there's hope of a new world order because people, the masses, are waking up and are realizing specifically that people in power, that I won't call them leaders because they have nothing to do with leadership. They're just people in power. They're old, they're white, they're making decisions on behalf of us, for us, and they're not going to be here or affected by the decision because they're going to die soon. So, you know, it's time to change that. And we're seeing that with the TikTok ban, for example. It's not about safety, it's about fearing the power of the people coming together. We've found spaces within online digital tools where we're connecting, where we're sharing, you know, like they're amplifying a lot on TikTok about Sudan. They're amplifying a lot about Palestine. They're going and they're holding those white feminists accountable. There's even some white feminists that are like, I'm leaving TikTok. This is too much for me, or, you know, so I love to see this. And I think that it's not going to come easily, and it's not going to come in a peaceful, necessarily beautiful way. Sometimes it has to be radical, and rightfully so.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Yasmina. I agree that it definitely has to be radical sometimes. Does anyone else have something to share about feminist solidarity?
Okay, let me just share this. I'm been actually part of the UN Women and Royal Tropical Institute 6-month classroom intensive training for gender professionals. And a couple of texts I've been reading over. One of them that struck me is about orgasm, generation, and the politics of reproductive biology by Thomas Lipper. You know, he actually quoted Mary Douglas, and she said, the human biology is always treated as an image of society. There can be no natural way of considering the body, and that does not involve at the same time the societal dimension. When I read this, it got to me. It got to me about how we should be thinking about feminist solidarity, because this is across board. So this it's more like a core ideology behind patriarchy, you know, among men and boys. So when you tell them, get your hands off me, they are telling you, oh, the human body, it's a societal image. We cannot, it's not about you, it's not yours. So I think with this in mind, this is just me saying we cannot not do without feminist solidarity. And if we don't have it as strong as it should be, then we should be working towards strengthening feminist solidarity to actually help us tackle all of these issues and bring about transformative change.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that. Definitely collective efforts into building communities. And also building on that, I know that sometimes it feels like this is such an overwhelming time. We see, we hear, we feel, and we are existing in a world that's really going through so much, and we experience all these things in real time. And so I don't know what that means for us as activists, as feminists who have to do this work. How can we care for ourselves? What does collective care look like as we become better allies, as we become better feminists, as we work towards uprooting all these isms? Maybe I'll start with you, Simone, because you authored our very, very beautiful, joyful self-care toolkit, which I'm going to share in the chat.
Yeah, I think whenever I'm asked this question, the first thing that I always say is just show up as you are authentically, with an understanding of your positionality as an individual, but also its relation to the collective. Wow, sounded like a very long slogan. Let me break it down. I really think a lot of the times, especially as kind of Black or brown feminists, there's a lot of pressure because it's almost as if the way in which we must exist as feminists has been dictated for us prior to our existence, but also for us to even reach certain levels of our voices being heard, we have to be a certain version of ourselves that is so tailored and so perfect before it can even be allowed to say anything. And so I really do think it's important that we show up as we are. Something that was, I think, when I was speaking to the feminists on the ground who were working with Kenya, that I really appreciated was that, some people were like, look, I don't know any frameworks around feminism. I'm not like well versed in all of this language, so on and so forth, but I'm a doctor, or, I am a therapist. And so when they had that protest, there was an understanding that there was a collective pool of resources because everyone was willing to show up as they were, and understand, how they can contribute to the collective. So I think that's the first thing. But I also think recognizing your positionality within a collective is also crucial for you to be able to know when it's time for you to rest, when it's time for you to take a break, and trust that your fellow feminists are also going to carry that torch forward. There's no kind of rule book on when do you get to rest, and when do you get to say, okay, I need to take a step back and all of that. It's dialectical and it's consistently going to be, shifting and changing as we, progress through movements, so on and so forth. But I think it's really important if you're able to kind of recognize your personality within a collective, and you can rely also on the people within the collective and you're not taking on too much. So I think those would be my two things. It's just that, like, show up as you are, but also rely on the collective to be able to foster that sense of self-care.
Thank you so much for that, Simone. And thank you so much for the very powerful toolkit that you shared. As I give Jenny and Yasmina a minute each, Could you respond to Leila on the chat, on the question she had asked, because I don't think we'll have time to go back to it. So over to you, Jenny, 1 minute.
Okay, and maybe I might pass it over to Yasmina to respond first, because I'm trying to get to the chat.
Yasmina, over to you.
I just want to say that rest is political. So make sure that you rest, take care of yourself, find joy and hope in your community, in sisterhood, and whatever brings you joy. That it's hard to think about finding a balance, that you do need to have a balance. Take care of yourself, do activities that bring you joy. You cannot save the world alone, and you cannot pour out of an empty cup. So it's really crucial and important to invest in yourself, whether it's your body, your mind, your soul, and just connect with your inner self and with your mission, your purpose onto this planet, and surround yourself with people that uplift you and bring you joy. And to me, it's in feminists and spaces, safe spaces like CoFem provides us, and practice gratitude daily to remind myself of how lucky I am. I know that sometimes there's some survivor guilt, and that we tend to focus on the negative, but also remember that what you've accomplished and how good you're doing in life.
Yeah, so I think Yasmina has said it also. I would just add, find strength in your tribe. Yeah, because I know people say it's difficult, building friendship within the community where you work. But I think as feminists, it's supposed to be different. So find strength. Second, on the next soldier, yeah, to vent and to gain comfort.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simone, Jenny, and Yasmina, for sharing such a wealth of knowledge with us. And thank you so much for everyone who was able to join the call. And just to say that, yes, we believe we have the hope, and we believe that rest is political, and we will definitely get to where we will want to be. If you would like any other information and CoFem, please visit our website. And it was really great having you all. So have a good evening, morning, afternoon, depending on what your time zone is. Bye.
Bye.